Did Apple just kill the iPhone 16 Pro?
Welcome to the All Future Podcast, where we talk all things tech, AI, and Apple products throughout the week. Today, we're talking about some very interesting things regarding the iPhone 16 and its particular Pro sales. And if you've been subscribed to this channel and are watching these videos, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for subscribing. And if you haven't already, we're continuing to make these videos throughout the week, so we appreciate your subscription, and continued viewership as well is arguably the more important piece.
Oh, yeah. That's way more important, man. Like,
That's not arguable.
The subscription is cool, but also watch the videos. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about iPhone demand. So if you're unfamiliar, the iPhone 16 just got announced, and then pre-orders opened up officially on Friday.
If there's one person watching this that didn't know that, that'd be pretty shocking to me.
Yeah, so numbers are in for the pre-orders, at least speculative numbers, and we have two different sources. One of them paints a pretty interesting picture, and the other one I think is completely doubtful. But the first thing to note from these numbers is that there's apparently lower demand for the iPhone as a whole, and then for the iPhone Pro models in particular. So for the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max, are actually for overall iPhone sales, we're seeing about 37 million pre-orders. And the iPhone 16 Pro Max is in first place with about 17 million pre-orders. Pro is in second with about 9.8 million. Normal 16 is in third place with 7.3, and then 16 Plus is in a far fourth with 2.6 million pre-orders. So this kind of paints a picture that we're seeing Pro models still being the most successful sold. But at the same time, those Pro models are down a decent percentage. I think the Pro Max is down over a quarter from what it was for the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Right. I was just like stone-faced running through all those numbers because, guys, those numbers are all imaginary. not exactly imaginary, right? But they're all based on analysts looking at things, supply chain, sales, all this kind. They're not from Apple. Apple hasn't released numbers since 2018. So it's years since we've really known what's going on, and more importantly, years since the people that come up with these numbers have been able to check if their methodology is correct, right? So I'm not saying these are like, they're not just pulling stuff out the sky, right? They have some kind of system they're using to get to these numbers, but you got to take it all with a grain of salt, right? Because I brought a visual aid today. Here's my iPhone 1, just original iPhone, yes. Right? Yeah, no, very nice, still works. I couldn't find the 30-pin connector this morning to plug it in, but I've got one somewhere. But go back since the iPhone 1, right? Pick an iPhone. Pick any iPhone you want. Just iPhone 13 sales up. Google that. So there's going to be articles about that. Then put iPhone 13 sales down. There's going to be articles about that. So it's like, so you can kind of swing these numbers any way you want to in terms of really what's going to make sure that you get clicks for your videos or videos too, but also articles in this case. You can't really look at this and draw massive conclusions from it, I think. Because again, they're not solid numbers. And since 2018, what Apple has done is they group basically all hardware sales into one number and then release that in their quarterly reports. And this is what we do know, right? Is that number is always great. And, it's not every quarter to quarter, but certainly year over year always gets better. And I suspect that's what we will see here again. So that's kind of like my thoughts on this, how solid these numbers are and what kind of conclusions we can actually draw from them.
And the other thing that's crazy about this is they're speculative numbers. And then you can see another article like this one from Apple Insider that's basically arguing that normal iPhone and iPhone Plus sales may have been the best sellers for the pre-orders. And that paints a completely different picture than the Pro models being the best. And it seems extremely unlikely. I could see where they're going with that and where you could speculate that those things are getting closer. And maybe in the future, if Apple doesn't change anything, the Pro models are going to have a hard time outselling the base models because of things like Apple Intelligence being available across the board. But it definitely doesn't seem to be the case. And that would be a big shift shift from previous years where the Pro models always outsell. I was pretty surprised to see this. I would not have guessed that the Pro Max is by far the best seller and that the Plus is by far the worst seller.
Well, I think there's a few things going on here, and I'm reminded of a thing they taught me in Intel school when I was doing intelligence. It's called the fallacy of facts, and you can have one data point that is a true thing, right? But does not tell you what's true about the overall picture. And then let's say these numbers are 100% accurate. These numbers that you read at the beginning, which is 17 million on the Max side, and then the second place being the regular Pro side at 9.8 million. Can you also draw a conclusion that, the Max is the one that's going to be the most popular, blah, blah, blah. It might be just people likely to pre-order are more likely to pre-order a Max, and kind of the more casual people who are just going to pick one up at the AT&T store in November are going to get a entry level one, right? So it's hard to, like, again, like I was saying, even if these numbers are true, it's weird to draw. You can't draw like a whole picture from it, right? It's just not all the data, and it's not even, again, it's already a guess. So you're making a guess off of a guess. Even no matter how educated it is, it's still not really the solidified ground truth of it. And a few other notes of this I think are interesting. Even if we take these numbers as accurate, there already are, right? There's 100% articles out there being like, no one cares about Apple Intelligence. Apple failed with the 16 line, whatever you want to say, right? But at the same time, 17 million of that Pro Max is like, that's several years worth of sales of a Pixel phone. So it's like these things are still selling massive numbers. So I think here's what I'll say. This is what I think is a takeaway from this, right? And that is thinking about what's coming next from Apple, right? And I think what these numbers really tell you, if you look at them and if you just take away the actual like hard numbers and kind of look at it as an overall mosaic, is that, man, if Apple makes that 17 Air, I bet they're going to sell a lot of that thing. So like that's kind of what I look at this. This is what I think about.
Yeah, because if you think about it, you have people who are buying the 16 and the 16 Plus, and now they're getting things like the camera button. They're getting things like Apple Intelligence, which previously would have been more of the flagship features of the Pro model. The Pro model still has a lot of things. It has refresh rate. Once you get used to that, I think people care about it. I don't know that it's, when you compare them at the store, that many people really care if they're used to the normal 60 hertz, I think is what it is. Then you also have the 5X camera on the Pro. But other than that, if you don't care about those small things, you have a lot of the same core features. So the future rumor is that for the iPhone 17, Apple is going to add an Air line in the middle of it. So just like the iPad, where you have the base iPad, you have the iPad Air, and then you have the iPad Pro, they might do the same with the iPhone. And I could see that taking sales from both their low phones and getting people to upgrade, and from people who maybe would have considered a Pro, but they actually downgrade to an Air. But it doesn't really matter because across the board, it's leading to better sales for Apple. And they'd rather have 10 sales of a phone that's slightly cheaper than 5 sales of a more expensive phone. It's scale. That's always how it's going to work. And it happens with things all the time. You can see it with things like right here, we're seeing it with the Plus phone selling the worst. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets eliminated actually in the future. But also with things like the Mini. You want to talk about the iPhone Mini?
Dude, you read my mind with this, right? Because let's say these numbers are true, right? And I think what you can draw from this is maybe just the percent differences are probably accurate, right? Like you could tell what phone is selling the most by just standing outside 5 or 6 Apple stores and seeing what people are buying, right? Like even if you can't get the full picture of units sold across the world, right? And according to these numbers right here, 2.6 million for the iPhone 16 Plus. That's a wildly low number compared to the others.
Yeah.
It's like a significantly lower. And it definitely, it 100% reminds me of the Mini, where it's a thing where like a vocal section of the populace is talking about this thing and acting like it's what people want, right? And they're super vocal, and Apple's like, fine, all right, we're offering this in the lineup, and then no one buys it. I wonder who is that person buying that one, right? because it really the pros aren't that much more expensive. When you take a look at how much they cost, so it's like, oh, like why would you not just go for the pro? And I say not that much more expensive. I know like that $200 jump is probably a lot for some people, and for a lot of people even. But I think for people who are kind of like living in the world now, this is where inflation has actually helped Apple in some ways, because the phone's prices have stayed the same, but the actual buying power is different. So when you go to McDonald's and a family of four is costing you whatever it is, $80 to feed everyone at McDonald's, then all of a sudden that $200 doesn't seem like a lot of money. So it's definitely like I can see like people really upgrading to those the pro models who were normally baseline people.
Yeah, maybe you were going to get a baseline 2 and you're looking at the plus and you're considering that, and then you go, oh, it's only a little bit more to jump from plus to pro. I might as well go for pro. I think that might be what's happening here, and I'm really curious to see what the iPhone 17 Air or Slim or whatever they call it will be, because it's one of those things that's very hyped up right now. Things could trickle down. It could end up that by the time it gets released, it's like, oh, the iPhone 17 is going to be basically the 16 with a few minor upgrades. But I think they need to do something different here. They need to capture those pro people back, the people who every year would have bought a pro, and this year 27% less, or this year the numbers are 27% less than last year for the Pro Max, apparently. So they need something to get these people back next year, and hopefully that iPhone 17 Air is what gets people. But it's all going to depend on Apple Intelligence as well. We're going to see that roll out throughout this whole year of features. I think a surprising number of people probably don't even realize that their iPhone 16 or Pro is not going to come with Apple Intelligence at the gate. Like, actually 0 Apple Intelligence features are going to be available on the phone when you open the box. I almost wonder if some people are going to be reporting, like, oh, wow, Siri's not any better than it was.
Dude, people are going to flood Apple forums going, why isn't my Apple Intelligence on here? Because people are dumb. I see this all the time. Like every time there's some app upgrade or something like that that Apple demos. This happened when they released the iPad Pro models, and they had the guys from Procreate showing demos of what the new Apple Pencil is going to do. And none of that was in Procreate because they hadn't updated yet, the software, right? And so when people bought the iPad Pro and they're like, rotation doesn't work in my Procreate, what's wrong? This is literally, I saw this like they flooded the Procreate Reddit forums with this. And every time someone had to come in and go, it's coming soon, they haven't updated it yet, just read, and they tell you this in the thing, So, but you're absolutely, I think, going to have those disappointed people. On the flip side of that, I think that it's going to be interesting to see what Apple Intelligence does to kind of the long-term sales of the iPhone here. Because as you start to use Apple Intelligence and people see those features, right, where they see like the custom emojis and all this kind, or just, see people use it in person and what it's able to do, is it going to change the tail end sales of these iPhones, right? As more people are like, oh, that's kind of cool. I wasn't thinking about upgrading, but that's neat. Like I kind of want to check that out. And if you look at normal iPhone sales, there's a spike at launch, and then it kind of goes down, and then it rises up through the holiday seasons, and then slopes off the back end. Is that slope going to be a little steadier this year as people see Apple Intelligence and what it can do? And really, we might be iPhone mini people here, right? Like, because we think these features are cool, like we think it's neat. But when it's actually in the general populace's hands, are they going to be like, I don't get it. It's not for me. Like, so it's going to be interesting to see, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it. Like, tune in to the March episode of the All Future podcast, when these things are actually out and people are using them, and see if there's actual adoption. But that's going to be really cool to see, and I think really going to be an indicator of where Apple needs to go. Because as we all know, Tim Cook lied to our faces and said that this iPhone was built for the ground up for Apple Intelligence, a feature that is not available when the phone is available. So an obvious impossibility, So as that stuff starts coming out more, like where the actual average consumer lands on AI. That's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and it's really easy to get into a tech bubble, which is where we kind of live in. And so it's really important to get out of it and recognize we're talking about pre-orders here. Like this is people who are deciding that based on an event for a product that is not released yet and I have not held, I'm going to put down at least $1,000 to make sure I get this product day one or shortly after. And yeah, the average consumer is not necessarily going to be doing that. They're going to want to actually see it and actually play with it. Or maybe they're not even considering it. It's they have their phone is great, and then they happen to stop by an Apple store, see the new one, and then they go, oh wow, this camera button's really cool, or oh wow, this AI feature is actually very cool. And that's what you're talking about, that it might not drop off as much as we're used to seeing with people getting these phones immediately. It might take a bit longer, especially when at the surface you look at a 15 Pro and a 16 Pro and it's like kind of look the same. This one's gold, but pretty much looks the same.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and I think that would be kind of, and I'm sure that's a number that Apple kind of looks at, is that like, oh, like what are the conversions? And they can kind of get this because people trade in their phones a lot now, so they know like, oh, what was the biggest trade in today, and did we have lower trade ins on the previous generation than we normally have? Then they can go, oh, like, well, people are sticking with their phone longer, right? So that's a real fascinating thing. And I'd be curious to talk to people who, I mean, me and you, we've talked about this many times. We skipped the previous generation, so we're 2 years back. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us to upgrade, really. But for the every year people, that number seems to be getting smaller and smaller. And I was curious, are there even people in our audience, right, that had the previous generation? They're like, well, this is going to get Apple Intelligence eventually. Do I really need a dedicated camera button? That's kind of what's coming down to, right? Do I want those camera improvements? Because that's what the newer phone is really offering, is these camera features and the dedicated button. And if you're not into that, it's not really a compelling upgrade, especially if you start throwing into the mix this idea of the 17 being a radical redesign, or the 17 Air coming to market, all these kinds of things. I could see that really kind of tempering initial excitement.
Yeah, when you talk about trade-ins too, Apple does have a pretty great trade-in program. So I traded in my 14 Pro. I think I got $400 off. And even if, in theory, if I had sold it a week ago and privately, maybe I could have gotten more. It just makes it so easy on their part, and it knocks it directly off of the price of your phone. You still get it on launch day and all of this stuff. But I decided I went for Pro Max, and I went for Desert Titanium. Did you pre-order, and what did you get?
I did pre-order. I didn't pre-order until the weekend. I didn't do it on Friday, so I'm not going to have a launch day. I'm going to be a couple days behind. And I went with the regular sized Pro in the Desert Titanium, which just feels like kind of the standard phone I always get from Apple, like whatever the new color is in the regular size Pro. So I didn't go out on a limb here. I was slightly tempted by the baseline though. Like when you look at it, and you're like, oh well, do I want to save this money? But as you mentioned, once you put in the trade-in, which it's $400 even for the 2-year-old phone, I was like, that's a good discount. It's convenient because Apple just sends you the box or whatever. And then I get a 10% for veterans discount. So on top of that, I'm out the door at $500 or something on a new flagship phone. That's a good deal. So it was an easy thing for me to convince me to upgrade.
Yeah, I did the whole do it in the app and then wake up at 5 a.m. and finish the order. But it's funny because I did it anyway because I didn't want to end up being weeks behind on getting it in case that happens, which sometimes does happen. Yeah. But I'm actually going to be out of town. I'm going to be in Italy when it actually arrives. So I'm going to not open my phone until 5 days after the release, which at this point, is that even worth it?
Are you even an Apple guy?
I know.
I don't think so.
5 whole days. Yeah. It does feel that way sometimes with how much people need to get it on launch day. But so you waited to pre-order. You didn't get it immediately at 5 a.m.
Yeah, I did not get it immediately at 5 a.m. And just because I didn't really feel the need to have it on launch day, man. And I'm trying to not do things just for like weird FOMO reasons and stuff like that. So I was like, it's fine. Like
Yeah.
and it just like I'm slipped like just a few days. Like I think I'm gonna get it that the Monday after launch is I think is when it's showing now
Yeah.
it delivers. So it's a not end of the world or anything.
Yeah, definitely not. So, according to numbers, it seems that the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max sales are indeed down, but they're still outpacing the normal sales. We'll see where this goes throughout the year with Apple Intelligence, and then how this all leads up to the iPhone 17 Air or Slim.